today to our Lunch and Learn, sponsored by Garrett Medical Group in Sibley and also the Osceola Regional Health Center here. Couple of housekeeping items. If you would, check your phones. We're talking about phones today, so just make sure they're on silence. That'd be great. So today we have Dr. Garrett Sterk here. He works at the clinic with us over there and also works ER and hospital at the clinic or at the hospital. So Dr. Sterk, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming out. This is, I think, an interesting topic. There's so many different things we could talk about when it comes to technology and screens, TV, phones, all of those things. So I won't be able to get to everything, but a lot to get through. Will hopefully can be interesting, hopefully can be informative, hopefully you'll learn something, so it's more than just a lunch, but it can actually be a lunch and learn. So let's get started. We're going to start kind of broad with when it comes to technology. So basically, if you want to know something about where we are today, you need to know the history. So looking back at the history of communication, the history of technology, specifically with communication and information. Back in 1800 BC was really when the first alphabet was developed. So before that it was all pictures, things like that. Oral tradition, so people would basically pass things down all through oral tradition. You had to memorize things. Not a whole lot was written down. Really the thing that popularized writing was the printing press in 1450, and that's when books became available to everybody. More people would be able to read. That's when we really shifted from an oral tradition or an oral culture to a written culture. And then just as time has gone on, technology has changed and continues to rapidly evolve. So you have, in the 1800s, photography, the telegraph, telephone, into the 20th century, TV, movies, computers, and then as time goes on, it keeps changing even faster. Email, home computers, cell phones in 1983, and then in 1989, the World Wide Web was invented, the internet. And despite what you may say, Al Gore did not invent the internet. And then the first phone with internet was in 1996. And then most of these companies that we think of today, the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, YouTube, which is actually now part of Google. Another big game changer was the iPhone in 2007. That really, in the same way that books popularized writing for everybody, that popularized the internet on phones for everybody. iPad, and then now today, it's crazy how much is changing in the last 10, 15 years. We've got smart home devices. You can run, your washer, your dryer, your oven, your thermostat on internet. You got the smart watches, streaming services. You have, satellite and cable are kind of falling out in the wayside for streaming. 5G, so now you can have all these things anywhere you go. They even have artificial intelligence has taken off in the last couple of years. Some crazy things that they're doing with that. And who's heard of the metaverse? Has anyone heard of the metaverse? Okay, maybe one person. So the metaverse is part of, it's a development by Facebook where they're talking about the embodied internet. So basically, you have these virtual reality goggles that you put on, and you can almost immerse all of your senses into the internet. So you can have a complete virtual life outside of this normal life just from these headsets. And they can be pretty convincing too. So crazy things that are developing. So I have a quiz question for everyone. I'm going to put a quote up there, and I want somebody to shout it out. I don't have any Halloween candy to give out if you get it right, but you probably have too much left over anyway. So I'm going to say who said this, a famous person who said this quote, and what was he talking about? So it has to do with information, technology, communication, that sort of thing. So here's the quote. Talking about this thing, it says, "It destroys memory and weakens the mind, relieving it of work that makes it strong, makes the mind strong." So who was saying this, and what was he talking about?
Computers and phones.
Who's that? Talking about phones?
Phones and
Okay.
computers.
It's not phones.
Who's that? Yeah.
Any other takers?
Elon Musk AI.
Nope, it's not Elon Musk. And I'm talking about the AI, but that kind of fits. So actually, it's this guy. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates, 400 BC, he said that. And he was talking about the written word. So he did not like that people were starting to write things down because he felt that it would actually inhibit the mind's ability to think and to remember things. And he's kind of right, actually. Because, when we're writing things down, we don't remember them in our heads. They used to, when it was more oral tradition, they would memorize the entire Bible and things like that, and they would be able to do that, and that's just how their brain worked. So I think he's kind of right in some sense. And I kind of say that just to talk about how as technology changes, it also changes how we think and behave. So that's the question, do we change technology or does technology change us? I think that's a good example. Another good example I thought of the other day is, so my vehicle has a backup camera, and it's got things that ding at me if I get too close to something, and the cross traffic alert, so it dings at me if somebody's coming from the side. I got into a car that didn't have that the other day, turned it on, put it in reverse, and started backing up without even thinking. And I slam on the brakes because, man, my brain hasn't had to do that in a while. Something that's so basic as looking behind you before you back up. They actually had so similarly, GPS would be another thing. How many of us use GPS and can't figure out where to go or how to read a map, even though we've done it how many times? So there's a study that they did on London cab drivers, and they did brain scans on these guys and showed that a part of their brain, the posterior hippocampus, which you don't have to remember that, but was enlarged in them, and that's what's used for visual, spatial recognition. So basically for knowing the streets of London like the back of their hand, they had an enlarged part of that brain, and interestingly other parts of the brain had to be smaller to fit that space. Talking about another study in 2008 at UCLA, they did scans so they did it on people who had used internet regularly, and then they did it on another group of people who did not use internet regularly, and they showed differences there. But then they had the people who didn't use the internet, they had them go on the internet 1 hour a day for 5 days and scan them afterwards, and they noticed they couldn't tell a difference. So even in 5 hours of internet use, there was no difference between somebody who used it all the time. So we get a little sciencey here. I'll get my pointer out. So this is up here just to show you a little science here. So this is a nerve cell, brain cell. They're all over your brain. There's billions of them in our brain. And each of them form connections. So they have incoming connections over here, these little guys here. And then it transmits into here and goes down this long connection to other cells. And each of these connections basically lead to our memories. They lead to memories, how we think, how we walk, how we talk. Everything we do goes through these little connections. This wrapping around it is called myelin. I'm going to come back to that later, but basically that's like the insulation around wires. It basically helps the signal go faster and stronger. Most of that is developed in childhood, or at least the hardwiring. So our brains do change, but they change more when we're kids, when we're learning things, and then as we get older, they still can change, but not as easily. So we got another quiz question. How long do you think that the average person spends on an internet page before clicking to the next page? Any guesses?
3 hours.
68.
3 hours? A little off.
Okay, 30 seconds.
How many?
30 seconds.
30 seconds? Close. So an average of 19 to 27 seconds per web page before clicking to the next one. So that's about 3 web pages per minute. And this is actually old data. This is from maybe 10 years ago. So I'm guessing it's a lot shorter than that now. So what does the internet do to us? We have this new technology. I think it leads to shallower thinking. We're constantly having our brains scattered, so we're not ever contemplating, we're not ever, we're always on to the next thing, So one author said the net seizes our attention only to scatter it. It's so captivating to look at these screens, and then, but it's only to kind of keep it moving, and you can't really concentrate. Interestingly, they've looked at studies where they've tracked people's eyes while they're on the internet and noticed that we read differently. So when we read a book, we read line by line, left to right, in a very linear pattern. When we read online, we read in an F pattern. So we go up here, and then we skim down to here, and then we read down here. And so we're really skimming more than we're reading. Another author had said that this leads to a permanent state of distractedness that defines online life. So even after you get offline, if you've been on the internet searching for a while, you still have this, your brain is still kind of, has that momentum where it's still scattered all over the place. Weakens our capacities for mindful knowledge acquisition, inductive analysis, critical thinking, imagination, and reflection. Again, all these things just take time, and they take focus and concentration. So has anyone here ever read something online and then forgot it immediately after?
Yeah.
I'm guilty of that as well. So maybe if Socrates had heard of the internet, what would he say about that? So some health effects of screens. So this is just screens in general. Some of these actually are more internet related, more phone related, but screens such as, they increase the fight or flight response, so that low level of the hormone that causes you to, the same hormone that if you are going down a dark alley and you see somebody that you're a little worried about coming at you, you either think, okay, do I need to fight this person or do I need to run away? So that same hormone in lower levels can be secreted while you're looking at screens. It disrupts your circadian rhythm or your internal body clock, which can lead to sleep issues. The blue light from these screens actually tells your brain to wake up, so that's why it's important not to be watching TV or on your phone or whatever right before bed, because you're telling your brain, hey, I need to go to sleep, I'm in bed, but then you're also telling your brain, we need to wake up, this light is telling you to wake up. This does vary with the type of stimulation, so I do want to make that caveat because not all screens are the same. TV is not the same as a phone, which is not the same as video games or a fast-paced movie. I mean, there's a difference between watching Mr. Rogers and playing a first-person shooter game. So that depends on the vividness, the screen size, how fast the images are changing, how interactive it is. So again, TV is less interactive than playing a game on your iPad or on your video games. All of this has to do with like instant gratification. So when we are online, everything is at the snap of our fingers. We can find something immediately. And this really leads to, we don't like challenges anymore. We don't, because it takes too much work. We lose resilience. We become more impatient. I mean, even as technology gets more faster and faster, we become more and more impatient. Also loss of imagination. Again, those things that we don't need to think or be creative because we can just find something quickly. EMFs, I do want to mention quickly about that. So electromagnetic fields or frequencies. This is something that is kind of an unknown. What we do know is that electronic devices emit a small amount or some amount of radiation from each of them. So how much, we don't know. This really hasn't been studied. I think there's been some calls from different agencies to say, hey, we need to look at how much radiation we're actually having throughout the day, especially as we have 5G now and all these other faster and faster speeds, faster and faster technology, Wi-Fi beaming all over the place. I think I counted that there's like 28 or 29 Wi-Fi routers in the hospital, so I wasn't that bored, but anyways, other physical changes that can happen from screens or from the use of them. So obviously obesity, being more sedentary. There's also something called text neck, which is from people on their phones like this, and then they get chronic neck pain. Upper cross syndrome would be more like when you're on your computer like this all the time, and then you get shoulder and neck pain as well. So different pain syndromes. So what about with kids? So some of these things I talk about aren't necessarily from screens. They can be, I think that they are related. Definitely multifactorial, but so ADHD diagnoses from 1997 to 2016 went up almost double, and it's continuing to go up. There was one study that could show that screens maybe were related to that. Iowa State did a study on middle schoolers, and if they had 2 hours or more of video games or TV per day, they had more trouble paying attention in school, or about 2 times more likely to have attention problems. And again, our kids are just getting more and more unhealthy. So obesity is up 85% in 30 years. Type 2 diabetes has doubled from 2001 to 2017. Depression has doubled from 2009 to 2019. 1 in 3 adolescents now have an anxiety disorder. And everything got worse from the pandemic response. The Surgeon General this past May declared an epidemic of loneliness in our country. And that's why I put the pandemic response in there, by the way. We could have a whole other talk about that, but when you tell people to, don't go around anybody else, don't have any communication, don't talk to anybody, what do you expect? So there's this thing called electronic screen syndrome. It's actually not an official diagnosis, but many clinicians have looked at this and found some patterns. So it's thought to be due just to the screens itself. So symptoms are related to mood, anxiety, cognition, or thinking, behavior, or social interaction due to the hyperarousal, think that fight or flight hormone, that cause significant dysfunction at home, in school, or with peers. So some symptoms are irritability, depression, mood swings, tantrums, poor self-regulation or self-control, disorganized behavior, oppositional defiant behavior, so that's the kid who you say, hey, this guy is blue, and they want to fight you about it. Social immaturity, poor eye contact, poor sleep, learning difficulties, poor short-term memory. These kids can be described as wired and tired. So the reason we can say that it's probably related to screens is many kids go through an electronic fast, so 4 weeks, 30 days, where they no screens at all, and the symptoms will go away. Sometimes these kids get diagnosed with other disorders, or they could have other disorders and those actually improve. So things like autism or ADHD actually will improve just from getting off of the screens. So some statistics. The average American spends 3.5 hours a day on their smartphone, and 46% of people use it between 4 to 5 hours per day. Actually, worldwide, it was more than that. It was up close to 4 hours per day throughout the world. So individuals check their phone an average of 58 times per day. So that would be, if you're up from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., that's about once every 15 minutes that you're checking your phone. This one was interesting too. Internet usage from 2011 to 2021. So we are changing how much we use the internet, but it's all in a certain way. So the computer was about the same. It went from 43 minutes to 37 minutes. But for mobile use of internet, so on your phones, it went from 32 minutes to 155 minutes per day. So 5 times the amount just in 10 years. So these statistics here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but these are all per minute in the world. So people send 16 million texts per minute. 231 million emails are sent per minute. One that really, there's 5.9 million Google searches per minute. One that really was interesting to me, it's not so much tech related, but $443,000 every minute is spent on Amazon. That's a lot of money. And then 1 million hours of video streaming. So that means, there's 60 minutes in an hour, so that's 60 million people are basically watching something on video streaming at any points during the day. So what about kids? So this chart, the main thing I want to point out with this chart, our kids are using screens more and more, that's obvious. I don't have to say that, but interestingly, the 0 to 2 range, so the AA, or a lot of different guidelines say no screens until 2 years old. 74% of 0 to 2-year-olds are watching TV, 49% are on a smartphone, so 1 in 2 kids are thankfully not owning a smartphone, but probably on a smartphone. So younger and younger and more is what we're using. So another chart here, this one I thought was pretty interesting. So the generational breakdown. The blue line's up here, it does look blue up there, okay? So this is by different generations. So you got baby boomers up here, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So Gen Z born in the late 90s or later than that. So the blue line is how much they're on their phone more than preferable. So nearly 80% of Gen Zers say, hey, I'm on my phone too much, which I think is good that they're actually recognizing that. But interestingly, baby boomers, they didn't grow up with this technology, but 50% say that they're on their phone too much as well. So, and why are we on our phones? Well, another quiz question. I'm gonna make you all raise your hands for this one. Multiple choice. So what's the number one reason why people use social media? So this isn't just the phones, but this is social media. So is it A, information, they're looking at something up, B, boredom, C, work, or D, health purposes? So who says A? Who says they're looking up more information? Okay, we got a few. How about B, boredom? Most people say boredom. C, work. Anybody use it for work? Okay. And then D, health purposes. And I don't even know what that means, but. So, answer is B, boredom. So 52% of people say they use social media because they're bored. So let's sum up what we've got so far. So we've got this new technology that is going faster and faster. We're using more and more of it. Our kids are getting more unhealthy. We're all getting more unhealthy. There's adverse effects to it. Nobody wants to be using it as much as they are. Vast majority of people think they use it too much. And we use it a lot because we're bored. I mean, the question that I asked was, why are we using it at all? So let's get a little sciencey again. Let's talk about addiction. So, this is your brain. Who's heard of dopamine here? Okay, a few people have heard of dopamine. So dopamine is a hormone, or it's a neurotransmitter or a chemical that's in the brain. It does a number of different things, but one of the things it does is it's released from this VTA here, the ventral tegmental area in the hippocampus, that part of the brain. You don't have to know that, there's no quiz afterwards. I'm done with my quiz questions. And it gets released and goes to this nucleus accumbens here, right there in the brain. The nucleus accumbens is what we would call our pleasure center of the brain. So that is the one that, you eat a piece of chocolate and, ooh, that tasted good. So you get a little bit of it, almost like you give a dog a treat. So you say, oh, that was good, I liked that, we should do that again sometime. When you do that over and over and over again, that pathway gets strengthened. And so for instance, you want to have another piece of chocolate and you want to have another piece of chocolate. This is the same thing that happens in addiction. And addiction is more complex than this, but what happens, so for instance, methamphetamine releases a 12,000% increase of the dopamine. And so that's why it is so addicting, because you have this hormone that says, yep, that was good, I need to do that again. And then one phrase that I'd like everyone to remember is the brain strengthens the pathway that it uses. So the more you're doing this, the more you're using it, the more that pathway gets stronger. So that then, the next part of it is this frontal cortex. That is kind of our thinking brain. That's the part of the brain that says, should I have this piece of chocolate? Well, here's the pros, here's the cons. Is it good for me? And then that's the one that says, no, you know what, although it sounds good, I don't want it. When you strengthen this short pathway here with the dopamine to the pleasure center, when you strengthen that so much, it'll just bypass that frontal cortex. It won't even go to your part of the brain that says, maybe I shouldn't. And that's what you see in addiction. That's why you see people who just can't lay off the alcohol or whatever it may be, because that is just short-circuited, essentially. That's why it's hard to just say no to drugs. Another thing about humans, I'll touch on quickly, is that we love novelty. We love new things. We love new information. Some people would say that's from before the time when we could get our food from grocery stores and from restaurants and from free lunch and learns. We had to forage for our food, we had to hunt for our food, and so if you're walking through the woods looking for something, and then all of a sudden, out of the corner of your eye, there's some blueberries over there, there's blueberries, oh good. You get a dopamine hit with that. You found something new, that's a good thing, so you get a little bit of dopamine. So, when it comes to screens have about 100% increase in dopamine when you find something new on a screen. So say you're scrolling through Facebook, somebody sent me a text, that's a dopamine hit. There's a new video posted, that's a dopamine hit. A new tweet, that's a dopamine hit. And so you can get into this cycle where you have lots and lots of this feedback that causes you to continue being on it. So in some ways, I'd say we're on it so much because we're addicted to our phones. A couple of interesting studies. So Indiana University, they did a study with violent video games where they did the fMRI with brain scan. And they had the kids 18 to 29 years old, and they looked at, they did a scan beforehand, and then they scanned them after 1 week, about 10 hours of playing violent video games. And what they found is that they were less active in this inferior frontal lobe and anterior cingulate cortex. Those are parts of the brain that are seen in addiction, or at least in inhibition, so stopping from, basically the thinking part of the brain. So essentially, just 1 week of playing video games, and it was able to change the brain. So remember myelin, this little picture? That's the insulation that helps things go faster and stronger. So this is actually developed mostly in kids, or you think about kids as they're developing, they're starting to hardwire. There still can be changes later in life with your brain, but that's when most of the formation happens. So there's actually decreased myelation with many brain disorders, so ADHD, autism, schizophrenia, drug addiction, as we've kind of talked about, and Alzheimer's. So now they've had several studies where they do these brain scans in kids who have a lot of screen use, and they actually see the same thing, the myelin defects. So basically, yes, if the kid's on the iPad a lot, similar type of brain changes as drug addiction. So, interesting. So, it's not all bad, is it? You know, am I saying we should just go and live off the grid and get rid of all, have everybody throw their phone away on the way out the door? I mean, maybe, I don't know. So one thing, there is a difference between adult use and child use. As I said, the brain is more formulated in the adult. In the same way, I'd compare it to, you wouldn't let your kid drive a car, or cook supper you wouldn't let your 2-year-old cook supper on the oven. Well, maybe you might not let your 16-year-old drive a car either, but so there is a difference. There's also the difference, as I mentioned, between different types of screens. Some that are more interactive, more vivid, have more of an effect. And so, yeah, I would say, am I going to get rid of my phone today? No, I'm not gonna. But so there are some good things. We have a wealth of information at our fingertips. It's amazing how much we can find out that we couldn't, or how easily we can find things out. It can connect us with others. Social media, texting. You can do a lot of things that can communicate with other people in ways that we couldn't in the past. It's easier in some ways. You can bridge relationships. Some studies have shown that there's increased hand-eye coordination, visual spatial skills, pattern recognition with video games. Education, I can go attend a medical conference in Florida, or attend a medical conference in Florida from my living room in my pajamas. So that's kind of nice too. But what about in education? What about for schools? So some people are probably saying, well, I only do educational things. I only have educational games that I play. So remember I said there's a difference with how we read on screens versus how we read online. There's more skimming. So this really leads to less understanding and synthesis of information. When you read on paper, it takes time. You have to take the time to think about it. You have to take the time to process it. And one person compared it to, if you have a thimble and you're trying to fill a bathtub from 10 different faucets, reading on paper is like having a slow drip from one faucet, and you can just take it back and forth. You can process the information. Reading online is like having all the faucets at full blast and then trying to figure out which one to take it from and put it all together. It doesn't work. So you get decreased reading, some studies have shown decreased reading comprehension just online versus paper, and they tested them afterwards. Interestingly, some studies have looked at how about hyperlinks on a page. So the little things that you click on that take you to another page, the references. So the more links on a page, the less understanding by the reader. And the thought is that you have to make a decision every time you come across a hyperlink. Am I going to, whether you're thinking about it or not, am I going to click on this? And it's almost like somebody across the room shouting at you every time you run by one of those. It's just distracting. Early and regular screen time exposure also reduces reading time, which can decrease your ability to read. Evidence for computers helping education. I wasn't really able to find much on that. Certainly if anybody has any information on that, I'd be interested in hearing it. Some different examples in studies. So the LA school districts about 10 years ago wanted to get an iPad in the hands of every kid. So they spent $1.3 billion on that.
Oh my gosh.
There's actually an FBI investigation into that now too, because actually the kids figured out how to get past the firewalls or the safety protection within a couple of weeks and were playing games and doing other things on their iPads instead of studying. 2010 Duke study showed that that home computer use for education negatively impacted reading and math scores. And then elementary kids with greater than 2 hours of screen time per day are more likely to have social, emotional, and attention issues. And there was also a study in the United Kingdom where they banned phones in their school, and then test scores improved 6.4%. So just some interesting stuff. So basically computers and phones, they're just more distraction. They don't really help learning. And probably the biggest tell I thought was interesting is Steve Jobs and other Silicon Valley tech executives and engineers. So the people who know this technology, people that developed this technology, a lot of them send their kids to no-tech schools. So that's an interesting tell, I would say. Yeah, I think when Steve Jobs was asked when the iPad came out what his kids thought of it, he's like, well, they don't have it. We sit around the dinner table and we have conversation and talk about books and things like that instead. and how their lives are going, so that's interesting. What about social media? So, social media is promoted as this thing, and I mentioned you can't have increased connections, and that's what they promote. They increase connections, but, so there have been some studies. I'm gonna pick on Facebook a little bit here. It's interesting that I guess it's not on Facebook Live anymore, but, so Facebook, there's an emotional consequences study. So basically, the longer time you spent on Facebook, the more negative your mood was afterwards, and that's compared to being on the internet. So it's not just being on the screen. It's being on Facebook compared to the internet. And so the thought was meaningfulness. How meaningful is the activity you're doing? If you're on Facebook for 30 minutes to an hour or whatever it may be, and then you get done, you're like, what did I just accomplish? I didn't do anything. And so I could have cooked supper. I could have done the laundry, something like that. That would have been more meaningful. Bullying used to be confined to the playground, and now you can bully anybody anywhere with these phones. There's actually been more than one suicide related to online bullying. Social comparison. So again, you go on Facebook and you see a picture. Oh, they have such a nice family. I wish my family was that nice. Or humans in their heart have this. We like to covet. We like to be greedy. We like to envy other people. And so this is just a way that puts it on steroids. Nobody posts their deepest, darkest, heart issues on Facebook. They post the best pictures. It could have taken them 3 hours to get that one picture, but that's what gets posted. Nefarious players on big tech. I'm going to pick on Facebook again here, but so dopamine feedback loops. That is what we were talking about earlier. This addiction cycle. These big tech companies, these social media companies, apps, they all know about this, and they actually hire neurobiologists, neuropsychologists to hack into that. So they try to make their apps as addicting as possible, because that's good for business. Instagram, this came out recently, or relatively recently. So Instagram had conducted an internal study several years ago that showed that it was increasing suicidal thoughts. Their algorithms were increasing suicidal thoughts and eating disorders in teenage females. They did nothing until a whistleblower came out several years later. So basically, they seem to care more about the bottom line than about kids who are suicidal or have eating disorders. So algorithms. So the algorithms are the things that tell you, hey, this is what should be the next thing on your news feed, or on your feed, you might be interested in this article, or and they have been shown basically to increase anger and polarization, and they know that too. So the algorithm. So if you say politically, who would say here that America is more unified than we were 20 years ago? Nobody. 30 years ago? Nobody would, because we get to be more and more divisive, more and more bipolar, or splitting in this sense. And I think social media has a lot to do with that, because where do most people get their news? It's from social media, and the algorithms are designed to give you what you want. So if you're interested in horses, you're going to see stuff about horses. If you are a Republican, you're going to see articles written that Republicans will like. So it kind of pushes you to the right, and then you see another article pushes you to the right. And if you're the other way, you lean one way, it's going to push you the other way, and pretty soon you have two different people groups. Can't interact, can't see a gray area in between. They don't know what the other side thinks. And so it just increases this polarization. And but anger increases engagement with the platform, so they like that. Oftentimes, it seems like they are using the same tactics as the tobacco industry with how they push it on kids as well. So hook them while they're young. They know the dopamine feedback loops. They know that if they can hook the kids young on screens, then they got them for life. So what to do? So again, this is kind of a broad topic. There's a lot more things we could talk about. What I would say is, like I said, I'm not going to get rid of my phone. After going through all this, it's tempting, but when considering technology, consider all the risks and benefits. So the reason I probably painted this more negative is because I think we have just accepted this new technology without really thinking about it. Think about how quickly in the last 20 years things have changed. And so just considering that there might be drawbacks to this thing that we're doing. So technology is a tool, not a crutch. It should be an asset to us and not run our lives. So using it appropriately, using technology with a purpose. So, why are we watching this video? Why are we on my phone right now? Just basically using it as a tool, using it purposefully, using it mindfully. Don't substitute digital or virtual for real life. That's, I think, a big thing. More and more we've been pushed into the screens, and that's how we communicate. It's exacerbated, like I said, by the pandemic or the pandemic response, where everything now is online, because that's the only way you're allowed to talk to other people. So, humans need real life connections. They need real conversation. They need touch. We need to be in community with one another and not just through screens. And then I've mentioned this earlier, the brain strengthens the pathways it uses. So this is a good thing and a bad thing. If we're doing something negative over and over again, that's going to get strengthened. But also if we do something positive over and over, that's going to get strengthened. So that's how habits form. So what about for kids? I love the proverb, train a child in the way he should go, and he will not depart from it when he's old. I know it's not a promise that you do everything right and it'll turn out okay, but certainly is a guide to seeking to have your kids be trained the right way. So for kids, my advice would be to delay screens as much as you can. There's maybe the argument of, although they won't get behind in the technology, they won't know how to use it. That's a complete myth. I mean, the guys who invented this technology didn't have it when they were growing up. So let them develop skills, critical thinking, self-control, and attention and focus first. Those formative years, those early formative years are really important for, think about language development. There's what they call the language window. I think it's about age 1 to 3 or so. Really key time for kids to learn how to develop language. So they need to be hearing things, they need to be, if they miss that window, they almost are behind the game. It's really hard to get that back. There's also an attention and a focus window where kids learn how to focus on something, how to have attention on something. That's about ages 2 to 5 or so. And so, if they miss that window, same thing, it's kind of hard to get that back. So some practical tips for kids or maybe for parents. So have tech-free spaces. So no phones at the table, no technology at the table, no technology on car rides. Let them be bored and look out the window or read a book or something like that. No technology in the bedrooms. And certainly with the sleep issues, that can be helpful. Or technology or tech-free times. Maybe have a day of the week. Tech-free Sundays. We don't have our phones on Sunday. Or maybe it's easier on the weekdays, or maybe on vacations. Encourage quiet time, boredom. Boredom's actually a good thing. It stimulates creativity. It stimulates, imagination, things like that. Play, thankfulness, encouraging thankfulness in this, me world right now that we live in. This instant gratification that we get from screens. It's hard to be thankful. Have time outdoors. They have something called nature deficit disorder. We don't see it out here, thankfully, but in the cities where people just start getting caught up in the city life, and essentially they've said that the fix is going outside. So time outdoors is key, and obviously that gets harder this time of year as it goes on, but and then you don't need to entertain them all the time. You don't need to fix everything for them. Allow some difficulty. Again, it's too easy to just click on something and then you have it in front of you. So let them, obviously age appropriate. I'm not gonna tell my daughter right now to go make supper for herself or something like that, but allow some difficulty, allow them to work at something. And then maybe most importantly, invest time or your presence or conversations with your kids. Be investing in their lives. Set a good example with your own screen time use. One way to think about it is digital vegetables versus digital candy. So we all know about the difference between vegetables and candy. Dr. Lee had a great presentation this summer about that. So what are digital vegetables? Well, the things that can be good for you. So maybe Skyping with grandma, doing a video chat with grandma that's 600 miles away. That's a good thing. Or doing a research project versus digital candy. The mindless video games, the mindless scrolling. For some kids, if you have more of those symptoms of the electronic screen syndrome, you maybe need to think about an electronic fast. A couple of the resources I'll talk about that. And maybe doing a technology opt-out in school, if that's something you certainly would need that if you're going to do the fast. But so some resources. So these are a couple of books written by actually addiction psychologist out in New York or New Jersey. And just, I don't agree with his worldview on everything, but a lot of, or maybe not his solutions on everything either, but a lot of interesting information in those books. I think these are all in the handouts as well. These two would be good if you're gonna think about doing an electronic fast, where you go off of it for 30 days or 2 weeks or so. The one on the right, that Victoria Dunkley, she actually is the one who kind of started this electronic screen syndrome idea. This is a good, helpful, practical resource written from a Christian perspective as well. Screens and teens, so just a lot of practical information in there. And then these would be more kind of backing up to where we started, more interesting things about technology and what it does. So the one on the right, what the internet is doing to our brains, that was written about 2010. And that just talks about how the internet has made us more shallow, essentially. That's why it's called The Shallows. The other one on the left is a classic. It's actually written in, I think, 1984. And it's talking about TVs and what TVs are doing to us as a society. It's kind of eerie reading it and then thinking about how much more things have progressed now that we have an increasing level of technology here. So, and then the website's similar type of things there. Like I said, I didn't talk about everything. I didn't talk about violence and video games and things like that, but any questions? Who's gonna throw their phone away now? It's not all bad. It's using it appropriately. I think that's the main thing. It's a tool, and if you're trying to cut a piece of wood with a hammer, it's not gonna work. You need a saw. And so using it mindfully and appropriately. So.
This may be a techie question, but occasionally when I skim through Facebook and there's something interesting there, and I want to come back or I want to show Pat, what I seen, I can never find it again. So I don't know what I do, but it once I go past it, it's gone.
Yep, that all has to do with the algorithms. I'm not really sure why it deletes things like that, but they have basically these programs set up to say what's the next thing that comes up on your feed. And again, it tries to make it so that you will be on that as long as possible. So yeah, I'm not really sure why it would disappear. Something to do. I mean, you could call Facebook and see what they say. Oh, Denise wanted me to talk one more thing about why does your phone show up with an ad after you just talked about something? So so the way Google uses your data, basically, this is, I'm not an expert on this, but basically what happens is, say you do a Google search and say you're looking for a new couch, so you type in furniture. Google takes that data and then it sells it, it sells it essentially. Basically, sells it to third-party advertisers. So, what's furniture? I shouldn't have picked furniture. What's a furniture store?
Ashley Furniture.
Yeah, so Ashley Furniture,
Everybody will have it on their
pays
phone.
money to Google to say, hey, let's put our ad in front of people who are interested in furniture. And so, so then all of a sudden, you go to the next page, or 5 minutes later, you go on the internet or on your phone, and oh, there's an ad for furniture. Interesting. Well, it's because Google is using your information. They, when you think about something being free online, nothing is free. Nothing is free in life. And so when it's free online, who's paying for it? You're reading an article that somebody put together. Well, it's not, you're not paying for it. The person who put it together is getting paid to put that article up there. Who's paying for it? Well, it's the advertisers. And what the product is you. They want your data. They want to know, what are you interested in? What would you buy? What's your profile of all these sorts of things? And so they will, basically, getting into the weeds, they are looking at who is this person and how can I best sell him, essentially, in a weird sort of way.
It's crazy.